Hi everybody, Moonraven here. I am going to go ahead and discuss what Wicca is to you guys. So, Wicca is a earth-based, shamanic, Western European in origin, neo-pagan religion, and it's a real religion. It's literally protected under the First Amendment, and also it's seen today as one of the most popular and really nonstop growing religion that we have here in the United States. Also, too, Wicca itself, the religion, is tax exempt. And also in census, I believe, of 2019, there was reported about 5,000 known registered pagans through the UK. It was, of course, in the western part of the world, but, you know, that's a lot. And sorry, don't mind my nervous stutter here. I'm trying to remember exactly what part I wanted to read to you guys really quick. Let's see. Here we go. All right. So, what is Wicca? Wicca is a religion of veneration of nature and the worship of divinity as containing both feminine and the masculine aspects. It is founded upon the spiritual roots of pre-Christian European beliefs and practices. When Wicca first came to public attention in the early 1950s through the efforts of Gerald Gardner, it was portrayed as the remnant of an ancient European fertility cult. Practitioners refer to Wicca as the old religion. It was also known as the craft of the wise. On the surface, modern Wicca appears to be a folklore and folk magic system. On the inner initiate level, Wicca contains pre-Christian European mystery teachings. Mainstream Wiccan philosophy holds that divinity is both masculine and feminine, and most traditions personify this principle as a goddess and a god. Other traditions view the supreme deity as a goddess who contains within herself the polarities of masculine and feminine energy. The roots of Wiccan theology stretch back to Neolithic times, if not the Paleolithic times as well. In the Neolithic cult of the Great Goddess, we find many root aspects of modern Wiccan theology. Wiccans divide the year up into 8 seasonal rites marked by the solstices and the equinoxes, as well as the midpoints of the calendar between each period. Rituals are also held at the time of the full moon, and some traditions also observe the time of the new moon. Depending upon the cultural foundations of each Wiccan tradition, various deities and festival themes flavor the rites of the year. Cultural Wiccan traditions include Celtic, Germanic, Nordic, Egyptian, Greek, Roman, Polish, Hungarian, Italian, and many others. Some of the most popular traditions are based on Irish, English, and Welsh elements. Most Wiccans live by a philosophy of tolerance for the beliefs of practices of others. The majority of Wiccans seek to live in harmony with the local community and their environment. One of the primary tenets of Wiccan belief is not intentionally to harm anyone or yourself, also known as the Wiccan Rede. Modern Wiccans differ over whether or not Wicca is a survival of the old religion or a modern reconstruction, or an entirely new religion of all. Most Wiccans will agree, however, that the Wiccan religion is at least built upon ancient themes, beliefs, and practices of pre-Christian nature. Others are adamant that nothing resembling modern Wicca ever existed. Whatever the truth may be, it is clear that Wicca has been influenced along the way by Masonic, Hermetic, and Kabbalistic elements, as well as the various tenets of Western occultism and Eastern mysticism. Wicca has rapidly evolved since it came to public attention through the efforts of author Gerald Gardner. Gardner presented Wicca as the old religion, a surviving sect of witches practicing a form of pre-Christian European religion. In the early 1960s, Wicca was brought to the United States, where it quickly rooted. During this period, the majority of Wiccans drew upon several books that were influential in the rise of the craft. For example, The Golden Bough by James Frazer, The White Goddess by Robert Graves, and Witches by T.C. Lethbridge, and The Great Goddess by A. Newman. In the 1960s, Wicca was commonly associated with the goddess Diana and with the Rex Nemorensis, the king of the woods, also known as Cernunnos. Wicca during this era. Wait, I'm sorry, I totally skipped a part. Many such Aegean and Mediterranean influences were readily apparent in the structure of modern Wicca during this era. Wicca appealed to the peace-loving hippies of the 1960s, who were also drawn to its ecological message as a nature religion. A claim to lineage through ancient families' traditions was the hallmark of the 1960s, and this was the birth of stories wherein a grandmother who was secretly a witch, had passed on the teachings. During the 1970s, Wicca moved toward a focus on Celtic religion. In addition, the magical writings of Dion Fortune, Aleister Crowley, and the teachings of Kabbalah began to merge with Wiccan beliefs and practices. Many new systems were created in the 1970s, particularly in the United States. The late 19th century romantic notion of ancient Celts as noble savages were renewed during the 70s decade. This also brought about increased interest in the literature of Celtic cultures, and many witches turned to Celtic mythology and such early works as the Mabinogi, a collection of heroic tales, myths, and legends. The 1980s ushered in the New Age influence on Wicca. This was the decade of the self-styled Wiccan, many of whom dropped the word witch and made distinctions between witchcraft and Wicca. This decade saw a turning away from structured traditions and time-honored practices, focusing instead on self-interpretive, approach to Wicca. During the 1980s, there was a sharp increase in the number of people choosing Wicca as their religion, the majority of whom had no connection to established traditions as a guideline or to initiated witches as their teachers. What had defined Wicca and Wiccans both in the 1960s and the 1970s now changed to accommodate practitioners with vastly divergent views. Vestiges of Judaic-Christian morality and philosophy brought in from former religious backgrounds, along with gender politics and sexual preferences, were very influential in transforming Wicca during this decade. The 1990s saw the return of Wicca elders to the community, many of whom wrote influential magazine articles and books. In this decade, a move toward balance occurred, an attempt to blend tradition, training, and structure together with the self-styled systems and personal adaptations carried over from the previous decade. Many people new to Wicca, and particularly the young practitioners, viewed this with some disfavor and felt the teachings were preachy in nature. Many of the elders continued to write to teach throughout the 1990s. As the decade came to a close, the two philosophies edged cautiously toward a harmonious balance. So Wicca and its etymology, I know it's a lot, you guys, but this part of the whole sector is about Wicca, so don't worry, we'll get to the good stuff in just a minute. Just gotta bear with me. So, Wicca is the root of the modern word witch. The etymology of Wicca is still debated by many. The American Heritage Dictionary, 1996, 3rd edition, states that the word witch is derived from the Old English wiki, meaning witch, and Wicca, meaning wizard. In 1891, Charles Leland published a book titled Gypsy, Sorcerer, and Fortune Telling. In chapter 4 of this book, he discusses the etymology of the word witch, connecting it to the word wiki, from what Leland calls medieval English. He also states that the word witch is linked to the Anglo-Saxon word Wicca. Leland goes on to say in his footnotes that these words indicate a wizard, witch, a prophet, a seer, a magician, or a sorcerer. Gerald Gardner later claimed that the word witch was derived from Danish Saxon lawgivers, who joined together the wig, which means idle, and the later, meaning learning, and applied the word wig layer to witches. Gardner states that this was shortened to Wicca. The Barnhart Dictionary of Etymology by Robert K. Barnhart, editor, Sol Steinsmitz, main managing editor, published by H.W. Wilson Company, 1988, first edition, states that the word developed from Old English wiki, a female magician sorceress, sometimes around AD 1000, 1000. The dictionary suggests that witch is related to and most likely derived from the Old English Wiccian, which means to practice witchcraft. The word Wiccian itself is related to the Old English wiggle, which means divination, and Wiggilian, to perform divination. The dictionary also suggests that the word witchcraft is derived from Middle Low German and Middle High German Wiccan, to bewitch, and Wiccan or Wicker, to perform divination. The dictionary concludes that by AD 1000, the term witchcraft was used to indicate the art of witchcraft. In a concise Anglo-Saxon dictionary, John R. Clark Hall, M.A., PhD, 4th edition with supplement 1960s, 1st edition 1894, published by Cambridge University Press. The word Wicca is related to wizard, magician, a soothsayer, and astrologer. It also suggests that Wicca may be connected with the words wickig and crafit, indicating skill with horses. It has long been held that certain individuals have a mystical influence over horses. Such a person is called a horse whisperer. Interesting. Now that's a lot to take in from, the whole, just where people believe that the actual word witch came from, or witchcraft, and then also to Wicker or Wicca. But yeah. So again, what is Wicca? So Wicca is a earth-based religion which was created by Gerald Gardner. I'm sorry, I almost said something else. Gerald Gardner is known as the father of Wicca. And the reasons for that is because he was the very first person ever to actually write a book right after they appealed the laws on witchcraft back in 1950. And once that law was appealed, and all the laws being that they say that if you practice witchcraft or if you're found being a witch, then you would be a heretic and you would be imprisoned or killed. Just back then in those days, it was just really stupid, brutally stupid how they were. But he was the first one to come out of the broom closet, so to speak. And he wrote his first book, which is called Witchcraft Today. And it explains roughly what Wicca and what real witchcraft is. And that's what started the whole movement of everything. He even created his own coven and his own particular branch of Wicca, which is known as Gardnerian Wicca. Gardnerian Wicca. And it's very, very, very strict, very, very secretive, very hard to get in unless, of course, another member of that particular coven decides to go ahead and let you in as a candidate, or as what we call a dedicant for initiation. And it takes a year and a day, of course, like all traditions of Wicca, if you go into a coven. But yeah, Gardnerian is one of the most strictest and most to the book. Also, Gardner created the Book of Shadows, and with his later high priestess, which we all know, Doreen Valiente, she also put a little, twist to some of the Book of Shadows texts that he has in his book of the goddess and the god, the birth of Aradia, the charge of the goddess, the charge of the god, and the Wiccan Rede, as well as the power, the law of power, and the Wiccan Rede of chivalry. And then we also have all the other wonderful sacred texts that come with the Book of Shadows that we all know. And that all comes from Gardnerian tradition. And then from Gardnerian tradition sprang the other traditions that we know, like Alexandrian. And that is literally that's a more open, sort of, in a way, type of initiatory coven, which is cool because the fact of, the Ferrars came from Gardnerian, the Gardnerian coven. So that's pretty cool that they ended up branching off and making their own coven, and they opened up doorways to new endeavors for solitary witches as well. Because in Gardnerian tradition, you can't be Gardnerian witch, or you cannot be a witch without being initiated into that coven. But Alexandrian brought the idea of, no, you don't necessarily have to do that. We can initiate anyone we choose, and anyone can come and join as long as they are of like mind and they're interested, which is true because, all of us solitary practitioners out there, come on. So, yeah. Gardner, there's a lot of different stuff about Gerald Gardner. He's actually a very interesting man. He is the father of Wicca. And there's a lot of things I learned about him. One of them, by the way, is that before he was actually before he wrote his book and before he actually created his own coven, he was a very, very, very high-spirited, very, very easy, like temperamental type guy, but he loved to travel. He loved traveling all over the world. He went to Africa to study how the voodoo and hoodoo practitioners of that area worked their ceremonial and ritual magics. He went to China, Japan. He went to the islands of freaking Tahiti, and he went to Hawaii. He went everywhere you can think of, even Germany, because he lives in England. So he went everywhere to study magic, philosophy. He was a very, very, very intellectual man, and he loved to learn everything he could. It wasn't until one day that he says in one of his journal entries that he was bound by the eyes with some kind of blindfold, and then he was taken to some secret place in a dark, but he can tell it was a forest because he can hear, the brushing of branches. He could feel it below his feet as these groups of people, men and women, he was not too sure yet at the time, had bound him and brought him, but of course not like forcefully, but just brought him towards their covenstead, which is known as a group of witches, this place of where they gather, where they meet generally, that they adopted basically as their own sacred space, their own place where they can work their magic in private. And then they initiated him into witchcraft. Basically, it's the old traditions of witchcraft, known as the British traditional witchcraft. And the witches, not Wiccans, but the witches, they initiated him. And ever since he was initiated as a witch, which he, of course, said he wishes to by his own free will to do so, then he decided to go ahead and go on this kick about, learning all he could. He even joined the Aleister Crowley, I believe, in his Hermetic order at the time when he was alive, and learned from him as well. Of course, he didn't really agree too much about some of the practices that was going on with his own secret coven, let alone his Hermetic order, which he is now like a part of and in power of, because Aleister Crowley had left it to him at the time. But he wanted to change some things. So he changed a lot of things. He changed it to suit his own eclectic needs, because he didn't think that everything was correct or that everything was right at that time. He wanted to, I guess, perfect it. So that's what he did. And that's what the rituals we have today are because of him and his little, let's fixer-upper type methods that he used on a lot of the different rituals that he had came across during his time. So it's pretty interesting. However, we also have the fact that the Wiccans, also the term itself came from, let's see, because in England it's actually called Wicca or Wicker. I don't really know how to pronounce it, but it's spelled W-I-C-C-E, whereas here in America we call it Wicca. Well, let's first go on this. Okay, so who brought Wicca to the United States? It wasn't just Gerald Gardner's book, however, being published back in the 1950s. It was also thanks to somebody he initiated into his coven who learned under him, which is Raymond Buckland. Raymond Buckland is a witch who also founded the Wiccan tradition known as the CX Wicca, also Strega, and it's Italian bases of Wicca, which is pretty interesting too if you want to learn about Strega, but we'll go into Strega and all the other traditions in another video. But yeah, so what is Wicca again? Wicca is a religion, literally, that was created by a very, very important man in our history, Gerald Gardner. Of course, he had help to build this religion up, as he also had his high priestess, Doreen Valiente, who we all know for the Wiccan Rede and all many other sacred texts that we have nowadays, or presently. And then from Wicca, of course, came a lot of the principles of belief. For example, if it wasn't for the Council of Witches back in 1973 and 1974, when they established that order, and they went and they wrote down the 13 principles of belief, so that way people can understand exactly what it is that we do as a whole, not just Wiccans, but just witches, all of us in general. It took a lot of time for them to actually just come up with it and agree with it, but they made it really, really great to where we still to this day have it and we use it as a way of describing what we do. But it was sad though, because they broke up that following year, I believe. So, but yeah, I guess that's it for this video, guys. So I will let you go. be sure to go ahead and take the test that I have that will be located at the very end or the bottom of this video. There should be a link that you can click on. So hope you guys enjoy it. All right, talk to you guys later in the next video. Thank you.